Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
I would say the first thing you need to do is just honor your marriage vow. You made a commitment. We don't always say this in our vows anymore, but the old saying of for better, for worse, rich or poor, sickness or health, till death do us part. You made a vow. So just honor that vow.
That's our guest this week, Steve Chatman. Steve is a pastor, a vice president of Rising Above Ministries, and a father of 5 children, including 2 with Down syndrome. We'll hear Steve's story and his views on life in this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Now, say hello to the founder of the Special Fathers Network and our host, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers, Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network. Please support the 21st Century Dads Foundation by contributing to Dads on a Ride 2023, which is a 3,100-mile, 7-day bicycle ride taking place from June 17th to the 24th, starting in Oceanside, California, and ending in Annapolis, Maryland. I'm one of the 4 riders and would really appreciate your support. Please make a tax-deductible contribution by going to 21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
And now let's listen to this intriguing conversation between David Hirsch and Steve Chatman.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Steve Chatman of Cookeville, Tennessee, who's a pastor, a vice president at Rising Above Ministries, and the father of 5, including a daughter with Down syndrome. Steve, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Yeah, Dave, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk with you today and to see where all this goes.
You and your wife, Lori Ann, have been married for 25 years and are the proud parents of 5 children, Taylor, 27, Josie, 20, Emily, 19, Mallory, 17, and Russell, 12. Interestingly, your 3 oldest are adopted. The middle of your 5 children has Down syndrome. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Well, and actually, Josie and Emily both have Down syndrome. We call them the dynamic duo, our Downs duo, although there's nothing Downs about them. If you know anybody with Down syndrome, there's nothing down about them. But yeah, I'm a East Tennessee boy. I grew up in Upper East Tennessee, the corner of Tennessee, if you will, Tri-Cities area, Kingsport, Tennessee. Grew up there, went to school there. Will always be my hometown. It's kind of where my parents were from. And so just a good, rural community. Grandparents had a farm, so I got to spend time on a farm doing farm work and slopping pigs and chasing cows and chickens and all that kind of stuff. And I look back and I'm blessed. You had a good childhood, good family. Most of our family lived in that area, so family reunions were big and those kind of things.
So out of curiosity, when you were growing up, did you have any siblings?
I did. I had an older brother and an older sister, and then I had a younger sister. So I'm the third of 4. Both my parents throughout our life were healthy and had a good marriage. But yeah, so my siblings, we are 4 incredibly different individuals. And it's funny how 4 people can come out of the same home, but yet be so very different. But we certainly are.
Well, thanks for sharing. I'm sort of curious now, what did your dad do for a living?
Well, he was in the military. He fought in Korea. Of course, all that was before I was born, but then he served about 20 years in the Army National Guard. But he was a salesman for many years. But interesting, he was one of the old route salesmen. I mean, he worked for a company and he actually drove this truck and would go visit and call on clients and had catalogs and say, hey, we got new products, and he had a different route each day. And of course, that industry kind of died out with, shopping malls, and then obviously later on internet and everything. So he had to kind of reinvent himself. And the latter part of his life, he kind of got into maintenance, and TVA got real big and opened up these power plants across the state. And he worked in one of those, and then ended up, his last job was at the local hospital there in East Tennessee. So he kind of did a little bit of everything throughout his life, and was just, but that was his work ethic, He was like, I got 4 kids, I've got to work and support them, so I'll do whatever I need to do, and was willing to reinvent himself, even as what he had always done kind of became a dying industry. And so, yeah.
Yeah, well, it sounds like he was able to adapt, and he had a good work ethic. And I'm wondering if there's any other important takeaways that come to mind when you think about your dad.
Well, the biggest thing, the overarching thing with my dad was, of course, he was a believer. He was a strong Christian. Just his integrity. I could think of a couple of instances where it might have benefited him to compromise, maybe stretch the truth, but he wouldn't do that. He was just a man of integrity. And he was also a generous man in life. When he had to kind of adapt and reinvent himself, he took some financial hits in that, wasn't making what he used to, and had a family of 4, and coming up through the late 70s and early 80s, the economy wasn't all that great. But I remember one time seeing my dad, my cousins had come in to visit, and my uncle was out of work, totally out of work, and they were really struggling. They were heading back, probably had about a 4-hour drive ahead of them. And Dad didn't know anybody saw this and didn't want anybody to see this, but I saw my dad talking to my uncle there at the side of the car, and he slipped him a $20 bill. And he said, Richard, I want you to get y'all something to eat on your way home. Why that's so significant is that I knew that my dad didn't have an extra $20, most likely. And that was probably going to be his lunch money for the week or something like that. But he saw my uncle with a greater need. And that was just a big part of who he was, just a very generous, giving person, even out of his own need many times. And so those are some things that really, stand out when I think about my dad.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. What a great role model he sounds like he was to you. And how would you describe or characterize your relationship with your dad?
It was good. It was healthy. My dad was, my parents would always joke that I got the most spankings of any of their 4 kids, which is true, and most, I'm sure I deserved more than the others. I was pretty rambunctious, but he was firm and did discipline me. But I never doubted his love for me. I never doubted. Now Dad wasn't athletic, so we didn't do a lot of throwing ball and playing catch. He would take me to my games. I was athletic, so he would take me when he could. I think the biggest thing, even though we didn't really have that buddy-buddy relationship, I never doubted his love for me, and I never feared his absence. I never feared that Dad was going to leave Mom. I mean, he loved my mom, and he was a man of integrity and faithfulness. And so that was very, that's very securing for a child. I never had to worry about that. And even though there were seasons, we certainly didn't have a lot financially, but I knew my dad was going to take care of us. So it was a good relation. And then later in life, as I became a man myself, we had some wonderful conversations just about faith and politics and life and things like that. So very fortunate in that.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing. So my recollection was you went to Tennessee Tech and took a degree in criminal justice. When you graduated, I'm wondering, what did you think your career was going to be, and how did it actually turn out?
Well, before I got to college, my dream was to be an attorney. We had lots of cousins, and we would get together at holidays, and, it's always like, what are we going to do? And, they would like, well, let's build a haunted house in the den, or let's go do this. And I would oftentimes say, hey, why don't we have a trial? Why don't we pretend like somebody did something? And because I just wanted any excuse to play and pretend to be an attorney, because for whatever reason, that was just something that I just always wanted to do, and looked forward to that. And so went to college and studied criminal justice, thought, well, that'd be a good, base for that, and just plans to go to law school. That was the dream. That was the goal. And for me, it really was my senior year in college that I really just had a pretty powerful encounter with the Lord. I'd grown up in church, but I was just really beginning to grow in my faith. I had some college buddies, a roommate particularly, that really discipled me. And so I was really learning to hear from God and the importance of aligning my life with His will. And had a pretty important encounter with God one evening in prayer, and just really felt like He said, Steve, it's not law school. And wrestled with that, honestly, because that had been a dream. That's what I saw myself doing. And I just tried to convince God, well, God, there's ways I can serve you as an attorney, and I'll do all this pro bono work. I'm happy, But it just, the more I went through that process, the clearer it just became that was not God's plan for me. And so just getting to that place of finally laying that down and saying, okay, God, best I know how, I'm going to trust you right now and pursue whatever that direction looks like.
So where did that take you?
Well, that took me a lot of places, because that part wasn't clear. What was clear was it's not law school and being an attorney. What was next, I wasn't sure, honestly. I knew it probably had something to do with vocational ministry, but really didn't know what. And so I had done some summer work at a Christian camp, and met a guy that was a huge influence in my life and discipled me. And so I spent some time with him and some others and just praying through what that next season would look like. And I did a lot of different things. I worked in a group home for teenage boys. I ended up going back to that camp that I had spent some summers at, and ended up serving as camp pastor there. And then that was really probably the key moment. He really discipled me, and that was where I actually became ordained into the ministry. And then from there, the next part of that journey ended up in church ministry, and then would spend the next 26 years in some type of church ministry in a pastoral type of capacity. And then to here at Rising Above, so.
Yeah, well, thanks for the quick flyby. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about Rising Above. But I'm sort of curious to know, where did you and Lori Ann meet?
So we met here in Cookeville. Like I say, I grew up in East Tennessee. Lori grew up in West Tennessee. We're about the exact same difference from Cookeville. She came to Tennessee Tech as a student. I had already graduated, and we had a mutual friend. He was a classmate of hers, and he and I went to church together. And so he introduced us one night, kind of a blind thing, said, hey, I want you to meet this guy I go to church with. I want you to meet this gal that I'm in school with. So we met, began dating, and when she graduated was when we got engaged, and decided that in fact God was calling us to be husband and wife. So we started that grand adventure back in January of 1998.
Yeah, well, the journey continues. It's been a pretty wild ride from what I can gather.
Yeah.
Not in a bad way when I say wild ride, but just an adventurous ride. Let's switch gears and talk about family a little bit. What I find curious about your story, your and Lori Ann's story, is that you have 3 adopted daughters and then 2 biological children as well. And I'm wondering if you can, maybe in sequential order, share how that family of yours, this large family of yours, has come about.
Well, my mother-in-law teases us that we don't do anything the typical normal way since we've been married, which is very true. We were married, and we ended up taking in a group of about 3 kids for probably 2 years. We were never officially foster or nothing. We really probably kept those kids out of the foster care system because we stepped in and just loved on them and looked after them. Their mother had some mental illness issues, and then they ended up moving away. And we knew we wanted to be parents and have children, and so, but we went a few years and we just couldn't get pregnant. And so we decided that, well, maybe God's calling us to adopt. And so we started down the adoption path and took classes with our state, got certified with the state, and then God brought our first daughter. Our birth order is all out of whack. Our first child is the oldest of the 2 that have Downs, Josie. We found out about her, and she was just a baby, and so we actually got to bring her home from the hospital, and that started the journey of special needs family parenting. I used to tell people our different journey into becoming special needs parents from so many is we knew up front what we were doing. And I used to say we knew what we were doing. And, now I realize we had no idea what we were doing, but we knew that we were adopting a child with special needs. So that was no surprise there, like for so many parents that give birth and then realize, wait a minute, something's wrong. So we entered that realm and learned a lot that first year. Then the state called us. Actually, we found out about Emily, who had been born with Downs, and this agency was actually looking for a family to adopt her. They didn't have any in their database that had agreed to take special needs children. So we agreed to adopt Emily. Again, we're so naive, we're so green in this. We're thinking, oh, well, hey, we've got one child with Downs. We got this covered. Yeah, we'll take another. So we agreed to adopt Emily. And right about the same time, the state contacted us and said, we've got this 8-year-old girl that we think you guys would be a good fit for. And we told them, we said, well, you need to know, we just agreed to adopt our second Down syndrome child. And the state was like, we're okay with that. Most sane people would probably have said, look, we're kind of full right now. We've got plenty on our plate. But again, not us. We said, yes, we're interested. And so within, I guess, a stretch of less than 2 years, we went from having no children to having 3 adopted daughters, 2 with special needs. So that was quite a journey. We were just thrown right into that. Had an 8-year-old, who we would later realize just had a really difficult background and birth family. And so we're doing that for a couple of years, and then God decided it was time to let us get pregnant. And so then we were actually looking to adopt again. And during that process, we got pregnant, and we had our 4th daughter, Mallory. And then about 5 years later, we had Russell. So I always talk with young couples getting married, and I'll ask them about, what's your family plans? And, they usually have this idea, we want to, be married a couple of years, and then we'll start having kids. And I'm always like, well, it may work out that way and it may not. You just never know, what your biology and DNA is going to look like and how that's going to work. And for us, it was very unique. So that's kind of how we became the parents of 5 siblings, 5 kiddos. And those are all very interesting stories. But God built our family, and He built it through adoption and through birth. So we've experienced all of that, and it's been a blessing.
Well, you have a lot of children for only having 2 pregnancies.
Indeed, yes.
So I guess there's some economies of scale or some benefits from that perspective. But like you'd said, that you could not predict what your future would look like. You can only look backwards and connect the dots and see, this family coming together like you just described. So it's very clear to me that you not only opened up your home, like you were saying, to those 3 kids that you had not fostered officially, but unofficially. And when you're opening up your home, you're also opening up your heart. Mm-hmm. And, it's not something that everybody has the capacity for. So I'm wondering, when you look back on how things have transpired, what was it? What were the catalysts that sort of led you to do what you've done, right? Because a lot of us, think, wouldn't it be nice to be foster care parents, right? Or consider adoption. But the unknown, right? I think logically, people hit the pause button, right? And, they might go to the line, but they don't want to cross the line.
Yeah.
So what was it that, led you? Was it Lori pushing you, or you pushing Lori, or you just both sort of felt the call, if you will?
Yeah. And you're right on with that. I mean, I talked to a lot of folks over the years. I mean, people have come to us, obviously, because we've adopted that are thinking about it, and they're like, hey, what about this? What about this? And a lot of times, it'll be the husband who is most reluctant. First of all, I think for a dad, if they're in a situation where they can't have children, like we experienced for several years, that's a hard place, because you feel like, what's wrong with me? And so you're kind of dealing with that. And so then that's a little bit of a loss of a dream there. And so a lot of them will be like, I'm wondering, will I love this child, even though we didn't birth this child. And for me, it was really quick. I would say almost instantly when you first meet this child, the whole dad heart just kicks in. I will say this, if that's who you are, if your heart is to be a dad, you will be a dad and you will love however you get your children. The 3 kids that we kind of took into our home before we ever had any children, they were 9, 11, and 14. And we spent 2 years with them. And when they ended up moving, we were heartbroken. I mean, we knew it was what had to happen and it was best for them and their situation, but we were heartbroken because we loved them. Now, I had 2 cousins that were adopted, so I had seen adoption in my own family on my mom's side, so I knew what that looked like, and that was never really something that necessarily scared me. Now, I look back now and can say, yeah, I didn't know a whole lot about it. And so I tell people today, it's not all pretty. It's not all romantic and wonderful. There's the good, the bad, and the ugly, and it can be hard at times. But if God's called you to be a parent, if God's called you, then that's who you are. Neither my wife, we didn't really have to convince either one of us. I mean, we both kind of shared that heart just to be parents, And I think God probably set us up with those 3 kiddos that kind of came into our life, and we saw that we have the capacity to love, whether we give birth to them or, they are placed in our home. So I'm sure that obviously that was huge for us.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Very insightful. So you had mentioned that you were aware from the time of Josie's birth, because she was the one that was just a week old or so when you adopted her. And then subsequently, Emily, who was about 6 months old when you adopted her, you were aware that each of the girls had Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if you can put yourself back at that point in time, because it was a relatively short period of time between the 2 girls coming into your family. What type of concerns or fears did your Lori Ann have at that time?
Yeah, probably a lot of it. Probably one of our biggest fears was just, okay, our family's going to think we've lost our minds, right? Or they're going to think, what are you doing? Well, our family embrace, what we're doing, because, again, are you sure? Are you sure you're ready to take on 2 children with special needs? And we had already begun to see with Josie what that entails with therapies and developmental delays and what that's going to look like. And now you're going to bring in a second one. And then on top of that, you're bringing in an 8-year-old who we know very little, honestly, about and how that's going to impact her. And yes, to a degree, we were both, I'm sure, very idealistic at that point. But again, we had already seen that we have the capacity to love, even though we haven't birthed these children. And I think that probably helped our families as well to see this is just who these people are. They're going to bring the neighbor's dog home for Christmas. They're just going to love. And honestly, we had spent several years caring for a friend of mine. He was an older gentleman and he was blind. And I'd met him in college, and he didn't really have family that take care of him, so we kind of looked after him. Right in the middle as we're adopting these kids, he ends up, well, actually just before we started the adoptions, he ends up with throat cancer. We're taking care of him in our home. We just walked through that process. So again, our family already saw these guys are crazy, they're just, but that's just who we were. And so, but still, I think there was that concern of is our family going to really think we've lost our mind? But I don't know that we had fears. We had already made adjustments just in our finances and how we were going to choose to live. We had a good support group around us of friends and church. And so, maybe we should have been a little bit more, but again, we were just very idealistic and this is what we want to do. Well, and that's important because, we were on the same page. That's something I say to folks that's hey, make sure it's what both of you want. Because I've seen situations where the wife was really trying to pull the husband and he was a little reluctant. And I'm that will never work. This has got to be what you both want. You can't be doing this just to appease your spouse because it's really what she wants. And I've had a couple, they were older, their kids were older and they were about to be empty nesters. And I think she was just wanting another baby. And I could tell he was not on board, but it's like, if this is what she wants, then we'll adopt. And I was like, guys, that is absolutely not going to work. You've got to be on the same page as husband and wife. And we were. And so that's what made that easy for us.
We'll be back with more of the conversation on the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast in just a few moments. But first, this quick message. Please help 21st century dads gather research on families raising children with special needs by having them complete the Special Fathers Network Early Intervention Parents Survey. A link to the survey can be found in the show notes. As a token of our appreciation, each person, mom or dad, who completes the survey will receive a Great Dad coin. Thank you. Now, back to the conversation.
At the risk of focusing on the negative, I'm wondering what some of the bigger challenges that you've encountered raising Josie and Emily and their situations with Down syndrome.
Well, Emily was sort of our medical child. Josie's been fairly healthy throughout her life. Emily has had several medical issues. She's had to have major back surgery. She's had open heart surgery. She had to wear a little helmet for about a year because she's had some issues with her, just the shape of her skull. I mean, she's had a lot of issues. So there's been a lot of nights in the hospital, intensive care units, and just all that goes in with that. When they were young, I mean, it was therapies. We were doing therapies all the time. You know, that just can be physically demanding, spending time doing that. And then just learning how are they going to learn. And even though both of these girls have Downs, they are so different. Josie's verbal skills are very good. Emily's are not so much. Emily's fine motor skills are really good, better than Josie's, you know, so they're so different. And just discerning that and learning through those things. And you know, what's potty training going to look like for a child with Down syndrome? You know, it's going to probably look different. How are they going to get that? Of course, now we're entering the transition phase from their graduating high school and that endless summer of, okay, what's that going to look like now? And so we're walking through that. Everything is just different. There's those moments, we call them having that special needs parent moment, where maybe you kind of look at seeing like what some of your peers are doing with their typicals, who just have typicals, and you're like, yeah, we have never been able to do that, and we couldn't do that. And so there's a little part of you that grieves that loss of like, yeah. And then when you have typical children like we do, you know, there's that constant trying to balance. How is this impacting them, and making sure that they're getting the attention they need and the support they need as typical children, and being able to do the things that they can do. And just kind of keeping all that balanced. We talk a lot about in our family, we divide and conquer, you know, so it's like, okay, they have to be there, but these can't do that, so I'll take them, you take these, and there's a lot of divide and conquering in our home. But it's not all sunshine and roses, for sure. You're always learning, but that's with any parenting, you know. I mean, as our kids go through phases, we do too as parents, you know. How we parent a preschooler is going to look different for our kids in middle school. Of course, now we're in that stage. We've got an adult child, so we're parenting an adult child, and that's a whole other level and ballgame too. So, just trying to constantly stay up on that.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. I'm sort of curious to know what impact Emily and Josie's situation has had on their siblings, your marriage, or the extended family for that matter.
Yeah, it brings a level of unpredictability. For sure, you know, we were laughing. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary, and we had a nice 2-day getaway planned, and that turned into a dinner at Olive Garden because you know it fell through. It didn't happen. Same thing at our 20th. We had a getaway planned, and it was going to take 3 different adults for us to get away. You know, we had a school run person, we had an afternoon person, then we had an overnight person, and someone got sick, something happened, and it didn't happen. And we usually take a picture on our anniversary, like of our meal. And we were laughing about how many times there's been a child in that picture, you know, because someone was sick, someone was like, oh, thought we were going to have the day, and it didn't happen. So a level of unpredictability, I think, comes with that. Our children have realized there's certain things that we haven't been able to do as a family because we have two with special needs, and there's some things that they just can't do. Like for our family to go on vacation and maybe go to a resort community and just spend the day walking and shopping and touring our girls would just wear out. They don't have the stamina for that. So we have to divide and conquer. And and we're doing that this summer. We're going to do a trip that's really geared just for our Downs duo, and then we're going to do a trip for our typicals, where we'll be able to go do some snorkeling and do some things that we just know they wouldn't probably be able to do or enjoy. And they go at a different pace, and they're working through that. I think siblings of special needs individuals are some of the strongest, most compassionate people on the planet, but it can be hard, and our kids are at that age where I think they're understanding some of that. They love their sisters, but at the same time, there's a part of them that probably wishes that wasn't our story, that we could go do some of these things. And so helping them navigate that, and how that they're beginning to see how that impacts them. Because when they're little, they don't think anything about it. I mean, this is just my sister. But as they get a little bit older and they can begin to recognize what those special needs means and what limits it places, we'll kind of have to help them navigate that, for sure.
Well, I appreciate your authenticity. It is a really important issue, what I think of as siblings and family balance, right? Because it's not uncommon that a disproportionate amount of time and energy is directed toward the child or children with special needs. Mm-hmm. And you don't love your children any less, but you have to recognize that it's hard to divide your time up equally with each of your children. Mm-hmm. And you already went from man-on-man defense, like very quickly when you had the first two children, to a zone defense once you had your third child. And then, like you said, right. Once you're in a zone defense, it's just a matter of what strategies you can employ, right? Because there's only two of you, as the mom and the dad, as right. The adults.
Yeah, from there on out, you're playing like with half your teams in the penalty box.
Oh, yeah.
You're definitely outmanned.
So you do need to divide and conquer. You do need to come up with additional strategies that are going to be a win-win, or at least a workable situation. So I'm wondering if there's any organizations that were useful or beneficial for both Emily and Josie, or your overall family, as relates to identifying resources that were beneficial. Yeah.
Well, yes, I'll say early on, in our state here in Tennessee, we have a thing called TEIS, Tennessee Early Intervention. They were fantastic because they had therapists come to our home. They helped us understand Down syndrome and how that these kids are going to learn and they're going to walk. It's just going to maybe take them a little bit longer than a typical child. So they were great resources. Our local school, the special education department, the teachers have just been fantastic. We homeschooled for our first couple of years, and then we realized for our special needs girls, they needed the resources and the expertise of those special education teachers. And that's been great for us. Of course, early on, the ministry that I'm now part of, Rising Above, was a huge help, just connecting us with that larger special needs community and just connecting with other Downs families that have children with Down syndrome that were older than ours. And so they were a little bit ahead of us, and they had already walked through some seasons that we had not yet. So they were a wealth of information to us. We got connected with a Down specialist out of Virginia Beach. He did a clinic in our area, and so we would meet with him once a year, and he was just phenomenal and had done massive research on people with Downs, and he was a huge help to us. And and finding these people out there and knowing that, okay, this is very helpful to us. And some of that we had to be proactive and search for. And then other things, people came to us and like, hey, have you heard about this? And so, yeah, very blessed with just a good community of support around us throughout this process and journey.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Let's use this as an opportunity to talk about Rising Above Ministries, which was founded by Jeff and Becky Davidson. In fact, I first learned about Rising Above Ministries shortly after Jeff passed away, and was inspired to learn that Becky was picking up the cross, if you will, and carrying on. And she ended up finishing the book that Jeff was working on when he passed away. And Becky, in fact, was the first woman that I interviewed for the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I believe it was episode number 55 back in April of 2019.
Right.
So a lot of years have passed since. But I'm so inspired by the work that Rising Above does and the character of the people involved, like Becky and yourself. So I'm sort of curious to know, what was your introduction to the Davidsons and Rising Above Ministries initially?
We had heard about this thing starting in our community, and at first it was just a monthly worship, sensory-friendly worship service. And so I took one of our girls and I said, I'm going to go check this out and see if this is legit or what this actually is. And so we went and saw what they were doing, and came back and told my wife, said, this was really neat. And then actually, when I was in seminary, I had a project, and I remember I went to Jeff and Becky, and Becky and I were just talking about this the other day, and I interviewed them as special needs parents because that was part of my project. So I really got to know their story and through that interview process, and it was really good. A couple years later, they started coming to our church, and Jeff actually ended up coming on staff at our church. And so he and I served on staff together for several years. And of course, they were still doing Rising Above really in their spare time, but it started growing. And so that was kind of, I was sort of on this journey, but more or less as a friend and as a fellow parent participating in a lot of the programming early on. But that was kind of how I got to know them, and then of course Jeff and I being on staff together, and then when he really felt like, hey, this ministry is growing, and I really think I'm supposed to step out here in faith and just go full time with this, we were able to walk with him through that and encourage him that, hey, do it, man, and as your church, we've got your back, and so that was a neat thing. And then just to watch it grow from there over the next several years as they just poured themselves into it full time, and the Lord really, just continued to bless it. It's been a really neat journey, obviously.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Jeff's not formally part of the journey, but what an amazing legacy that he's left, mm-hmm. and that Becky's carried on, for that matter. And for our listeners who are not familiar with the programs and the resources that Rising Above provides, how would you characterize them?
Yeah, I just spent a couple of days at a conference in Atlanta on special needs ministries, and I am just amazed at the many unique ministries that are out there, which I think is fitting because the special needs community is diverse. There's no one size fits all. Parents with Down syndrome kids, their lives look quite different from a family with autism or that's impacted by cerebral palsy or some other multiple diagnosis. And so there's a need for multiple organizations. And so it's finding your role. And so Rising Above, I think for us, our focus is on family and primarily moms and dads and siblings, and just coming alongside and bringing hope and encouragement. We do a lot of resource creation as far as online Bible studies and small group curriculums for moms, for dads, for couples. We're in the process of creating a program for siblings right now to come alongside those and encourage them. We do a lot of that. We have a thing called Respite for Your Mind, where we just create these 2 to 5 minute little encouraging devotional type things that you just listen to, maybe on one of those days that you just come out of a really rough IEP, or you've just had one of those special needs parent moments and you're kind of discouraged. You can pull one of these things up and just spend 2 to 5 minutes, being encouraged from the scriptures and from another special needs parent. We're even creating a thing on there for prayers that, like, if you're getting ready to go into an IEP and you just want somebody to pray over you, here's a prayer that's been recorded, and just play this and let this prayer be over you as you walk into that IEP meeting, because maybe you don't have anyone to do that for you. So just creating a lot of resources. That's available globally. I mean, we have folks literally around the world that are downloading these resources, that are jumping on our online community groups. We have moms in South Dakota who feel like, I don't have anybody in my neighborhood, but they get on this weekly Zoom call with other moms, and they're able to be encouraged, and it's a place to unpack some of the things that they're experiencing. We have those for dads as well. So just offering those resources. And then, of course, our local footprint here in Middle Tennessee, we do a lot of events where we recognize these families. We try to create events that are accessible for everyone. I mean, the whole family can come, and there's something for everyone, no matter what your child's disability, what their age may be. It's accessible for you, and just to celebrate these families and give them some things to do together. So that's a big part. It's just, we're an encouraging ministry to try to come alongside and really bring the hope of Christ into these families, to let them know that, yes, this is hard, but, this is what God has called you to. And we want to come alongside and just let you know, hey, you're not alone. God sees you. God hears you. God knows. He cares. He has called you to this. But you're also not alone there on planet Earth, because there's a community of people who are like you, who are walking through challenges just like you, and we can encourage and help each other along the way. So that's our heart. That's our vision. And so we're busy every week creating these programs, creating these resources, talking with families and talking with moms, talking with dads, and just trying to encourage them. And then the beauty in the special needs community, that there are so many wonderful organizations. I spend a lot of time too pointing people, hey, that's not what we do, but man, let me tell you about this organization over here. Here's their website. You need to go. They've got some great resources for you. And that's what I love about the special needs ministry community. There's just that willing to share and promote one another. And that, like, hey, that's not necessarily what we do. We're not a one shop for everyone, but here's a great organization that we know and we respect and we trust, and we think that'll be a great help to you in your situation.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. And in addition to all that you had mentioned, I know there's a podcast, a Rising Above Ministries podcast that Becky hosts. I listen to on an ongoing basis. Mm-hmm. There's retreats like By the Brook, which is mostly a program for women. And a new aspect of Rising Above is the app that you've developed, which makes it super easy for people to access all the resources that you were making reference to. So my hat's off to you and your colleagues, and I'm hoping that God will continue to bless the work that you do.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And, we're a small team. There's about 5 of us here. They are pretty amazing. The app, that they put together, I had very little to do with that, but they have done a great job putting that together and just being in touch with what the needs are. Becky actually does a workshop at conferences on that very thing. Don't assume you know what families need. And so we have worked really hard, to try to just do life with folks and listen. What are some things that are needed, and then create materials and resources or events that meet those needs. That's why it's important for us, while we're doing all these resources and online things, and yes, our app and our website and our podcast that can be accessed around the world, and they are. We have connections in the Middle East and Africa. I mean, people are using these resources. We've got resources now translated in Arabic and Spanish. I mean, there's just, but it's also important that we here locally are doing life and doing ministry. We just last night I had a dads group that meets once a month, and we feed the dads and we just hang out and we're just talking. And so it's good for me to hear from these dads who are raising kids with autism, who are raising kids with mobility issues and things, to hear what their life looks like, because it's a little bit different from mine. So then as we're thinking about what do these programs need to look like, and Becky's the same thing. I mean, we're here, in the trenches, if you will, doing life with our community and our fellow special needs dads and moms. And so that helps us to not assume as we're producing things, and it's not just theoretical. These are things that we are living, and we are, sometimes we're testing out on our local families, like, hey, what do you think about this? And sometimes they're like, oh, that's terrible, Steve. That's a terrible idea. And so it's like, okay, we're not going to put that on the website. And so it's important that we're doing that and just trying to continue to put out stuff that we feel like is tested and it's going to be helpful to the special needs community out there.
Yeah, well, I love it. So I'm thinking about advice now, and I'm wondering what advice that you can offer a parent, or specifically a dad, who's raising a child with a special need or special needs.
That's a great question, and gosh, I look around the special needs community, and I'm like, there's a lot of good advice out there that's already been given. And, I think a lot about my friend Jeff Davidson, the late Jeff Davidson, and he and I would have conversations. One of the things that he and I talked about a lot was just the importance of embracing the calling that you have. You might not like it. A lot of times it's not what you envisioned. It's not how you saw your life looking. But I've always said, our life is not a complete autobiography. I don't have absolute control over my life story. There's many times that God takes that pen out of my hand and he writes a chapter, or he lets someone else write a chapter. And it's usually chapters that I would not have included. Like, no, that's not going to be part of my story. But it is. And then he always puts that pen back in my hand and says, okay, now you write the next chapter. This is your response to this diagnosis. This is your response to this new season that's hard. This is your response to that shattered dream. And of course, what I see is for some, that next chapter is not good. And that can be okay. Sometimes we have to have that hard chapter, and then the next chapter is like, but then I met, so-and-so, or I met this guy and he helped me or whatever. And it's just to keep writing those chapters. And this too. I mean, there's way too many dads that check out, and we just want to encourage them to stay in there. Special needs impacts our marriage. Marriage is hard in the best of situations, but you bring a special needs child into it, and it gets really hard. I think moms embrace that challenge a little bit quicker, but that's not always good, because as dads, we're fixers and doers. And the first thing we realize is I can't fix my child. And then if mom just morphs into Mama Bear and she starts taking the lead on the child, and then sometimes she kind of pushes dad out. It's like, I don't need you. If this kid's going to make it, it's going to get the help, I'm going to do it. And so dad just kind of he's sort of pushed out here. He's already struggling with accepting this, and he can't fix it. And what's it going to look like now? And that just creates a huge opportunity for that marriage to go south. And one of the things I guess I say to dads, and there's a lot of things we can say, about, hey, to have a good marriage, you got to connect, you got to have fun together, you got to make sure you're doing this, and all that's true. But I guess the first thing I think for some, and maybe a dad that's listening, is when it's hard, I would say the first thing you need to do is just honor your marriage vow. You made a commitment. We don't always say this in our vows anymore, but the old saying of for better, for worse, rich or poor, sickness or health, till death do us part. You made a vow. So just honor that vow. And probably at that moment, you don't feel like doing that. You're not having any romance. You're not having any fun. It's all changed. But the truth of the matter is, that's what you made a vow to. So just honor that vow. Stay in that marriage. Stay connected. Get some help. And then you can figure out how to start doing those other things. Like, how do we have some respite and some date nights? How do we work on our communication? How do we figure out how to do this as a team? And what are some things that I can do? And so it's not just mom. But I think the first thing I just say is you got to stay. Honor that vow that you made. Be a man of integrity, even when it's hard. These are hard chapters, but I believe if you'll do that there'll be some good chapters to come that you'll probably be surprised. You're not going to feel like it. And our culture says just follow your heart, right? But I tell that no. Sometimes I have to lead my heart. I have to tell my heart what we're going to do. My heart wants to do this, but I have to listen to my mind and say, no, the truth is this. I made a vow and I need to keep it right now. And the truth is your wife and your child needs you. But I know it's hard. I guess that would be the thing, is just stay in there and don't give up. Don't check out.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. I love the analogy to writing chapters. They're not always chapters that you're going to write. Sometimes they're written by other people. Mm-hmm. And the importance of staying the course, right? You made a commitment. It's a vow. It's a long-term proposition. And, there are some dark corners. There are some moments that you probably don't want to find yourself in, but hopefully they're temporary and that you can work through them. And with some guidance, like you said, sometimes you need help. And it's not a weakness to ask for help. It's actually a strength.
No.
To be able to ask for help.
Absolutely.
So let's give a special shout out to Becky Davidson for helping connect us.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I don't know. Just I appreciate what you guys are doing. I found out about you actually at our dad's retreat this last fall. We were just talking about, hey, what have been some things that have encouraged you? And one of our dads shared about the Special Fathers Network and how that had impacted him, and just what you guys are doing there by connecting dads and mentoring dads. It's a big deal. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on your podcast. It's a big deal. Dads need dads. We got to find each other out there, and we need that encouragement. And younger dads need older dads who are a little bit further down the journey. Just their very presence encourages those dads, like, okay, this dad's he's still in the game, he's still going, he's still married. And so it's super huge. And so I appreciate what you guys are doing. And again, I'm excited about, officially being a part of this special needs ministry community that's out there coming alongside of our families. It's a big deal. So thank you guys for what you're doing there as well.
I think you're referring to Matt Rebine,
right?
Who's part of our Special Fathers Network mastermind group. So he's in a group that meets on a weekly basis. He's very intentional about being the best dad he can be.
Yes, absolutely.
And what a great role model he is for a lot of other dads, even though he's a young dad himself. Mm-hmm. So if somebody wants to learn about Rising Above Ministries or contact you, what's the best way to do that?
Our website, risingaboveministries.org, is a great place to go and download our app. You can find it on wherever you download your apps, whatever you use there. Just search for Rising Above Ministries, and it's on there. That's a great way. All our contact information is on both of those. That's not just for Middle Tennessee, no matter where you're at. If you'd like to learn more about us or check out our resources, you can do that. If there's questions, we're here. So we welcome that for sure.
We'll be sure to include all that information in the show notes so it's as easy as possible for somebody to follow up. Steve, thank you for your time and many insights. As a reminder, Steve is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stCenturyDads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Steve, thanks again.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stCenturyDads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stCenturyDads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.